I've been pushing for more communication in our D&D groups, but this isn't quite the communication I had in mind. An NPC died after the party couldn't find a cure for his vampirism. After the session, a player tells me that the NPC death is bothering him, and he thinks he's not in a good mental state to play a game like this right now. I tell him to take a break and let me know when he's ready and thinks he can handle it. Player responds with a paragraph about how crappy it was that I just said screw him, and he's gonna take the opportunity to cut people like me out of his life since I don't give a damn about him. I honestly thought the conversation went well. I honestly can't point to a time where we were talking and it seemed like he was upset until he texted me that. I don't like how it ended, so I figured I'd ask you guys if I made the right choice. We haven't received an update on this developing story, but if this is where it ends, then I honestly don't think OP is losing out on too much with this friend out of their life. This is a story about a murder hobo and the stupid amount of entitlement he had in and out of character. The cast is set: the DM, our murder hobo, and myself. This is a group that we started amongst coworkers while combating the pandemic. I ended up joining months later while Murder Hobo was there from the start. While our DM had professionally hosted sessions before, the rest of us were fairly new and had never played a full campaign before. Most games were hosted after working hours and within our workspace, with permission of course. The Murder Hobo and I had never had a great working relationship. As a coworker, I considered him to be lazy and entitled. His entire personality revolved around being an edgelord. He was the type of person who thought it was the funniest thing in the world to gaslight people or show knives off at work. I never put up with his sense of entitlement or edgy behavior, which would usually result in a mega tantrum from him. I'm certain he hated me for it. I tried not to let him turn me off of D&D though. The Murder Hobo turned out to be a nightmare to play with. He would always attempt to provoke angry or hostile actions from NPCs, even allies. If we were hiding while enemy NPCs were lurking nearby, he would find a way to alert them to our presence and throw us into combat. Out of character, he would chide the DM for telling the story and demand more combat encounters. Keep in mind, his character would disengage in almost every encounter. He even gutted and harvested the organs of another player character who was supposedly his character's best friend. The DM tore out at least 6 pages worth of side notes from his notebook that day. Honestly, I think he was just living out some sort of edgy fantasy through his character. One day, while we were waiting for the rest of the players to arrive for our game, we see the Murder Hobo getting escorted across the parking lot by a security guard. He had this little grin plastered across his face as he was marched across the pavement, almost like he was proud of what he'd done. Only I and the DM were present when this happened. He'd walked into the building, collected his things from his locker, and was walked out. Needless to say, our session ended before it started that day. Murder Hobo had been fired. We later find out that the Murder Hobo had been compiling a rather long list of current and former coworkers, including those in our D&D group that he personally wanted to murder, and that he mentioned this to his psychiatrist. Of course, this was immediately reported to the appropriate chain of command, and he had been fired nearly on the spot. It was eerie how nonchalant he was about the whole thing. He only tried to come back to the campaign once the following week, but was swiftly turned down by the DM before he even had a chance to leave the parking lot. Last I heard, he'd been complaining to a former player about being banned from the game. He thinks that we're already bullying him, and it's unfair we won't allow him anywhere near the group. It's almost been a year since we last saw him. I don't think he'll be making an actual attempt on our lives, mostly because he's a simpering coward. Since he's been gone, our game has been much more enjoyable, and the amount of combat/character deaths has gone down significantly. Good riddance. If it makes anyone feel any better, I'm sure that grin will be gone the second he has to pay rent without a paycheck from his job. Look, there are absolutely combat-focused games out there, but if the rest of the group isn't enjoying that kind of playstyle, you shouldn't ruin the game by engaging in it. The fun of everyone at the table is most important, and if following the story and interacting with NPCs and all that, if that's what the group is into, don't ruin it for them just because you want to act out your Murder Hobo edgelord fantasy. I guarantee that you guys already know this. We've talked about edgelords so much that it's been burned into all of our collective minds, but it bears saying once more. I hope the group well in their future games to come. This story is definitely not the worst horror story, especially compared to some of the other tales on this sub, but it still makes my group and I wonder how we put up with this guy for so long. It's the story of one particular player, let's call him Brad. It's a fake name, obviously. It was also the first group I ever DM'd for. I was very inexperienced and insecure about my players not having fun, and because of that, I allowed the players' problems for way too long, to the point where it ruined everyone else's fun. But hindsight is 2020. For the first 6 months, nothing worth mentioning happened. All of the players were new to D&D, most of them had never played before, except Brad, who had a few years of experience, not just with D&D, but other systems as well. He played a charismatic character and became the party's face. It was nice at the time since the newer players were hesitant to make decisions and roleplay. Although looking back, Brad was definitely the type that needed everything to go his way, and since no one knew better, we let him pretty much dictate everything the party did. He also had a tendency to complain about mechanics, but none of us knew enough about the game to really engage in that. Eventually, that campaign fell apart for scheduling reasons, and we decided to switch to a different module. We started over with new characters and some new players. By now, everyone had been playing for a while and was more comfortable with role-playing more confident characters. The module we agreed on was Curse of Strahd, and I made sure to have a session 0 where I explained the tone of the game. Dark, horror, aiming for 70-30 RP combat split, favor on RP, and everyone agreed on that. It became obvious very quickly, however, that there was a divide in the group. Everyone had fun role-playing amongst each other and with the NPCs and solving mysteries and quests. We often had whole sessions without any combat, and it was great. Except veteran Brad didn't like it. He started to get bored and didn't care for the story. He often checked out completely, only paying attention during combat. It got to the point where he regularly had to ask what was going on. And even though he didn't say it out loud yet, it was pretty obvious to the group that he didn't enjoy the game. Feeling a bit awkward, we all had to adjust our playstyles, shortening roleplay when it was obvious that Brad wasn't interested, or skipping investigations in order to get to the combat quicker. What made it even worse is that Brad had his own game that he occasionally DM'd, an arena-type game where our characters were thrown into a stage fight with monsters of the week. We played this game when someone couldn't make it, and we didn't want to play the main campaign without them. Only it seemed that Brad was hoping every week that somebody wouldn't show up so we would play his game instead. Even if we were all there, he'd ask if we want to play his game instead of mine. Some of the blame here is definitely on me. As the DM, I should have just shut that down, but I was really insecure and unsure. Maybe the other people wanted to play in his game instead. So I would awkwardly ask the other players, who would equally awkwardly answer that they had showed up for my scheduled game. Brad's behavior became worse and worse until it escalated into one particularly bad session. The party was asked to search for a missing NPC. They were already on their way to a different quest and started discussing what they should do first. They asked for more information and just did some role-playing, trying to figure out how and where to look for the NPC. Brad was having none of it, though. After a few minutes, his character left the tent as the discussion was taking too long, and the party should just move on. The rest of the group left shortly after, as Brad seemed pretty annoyed and no one wanted him to not have fun. He then argued for at least 15 minutes on how the 5 minutes of roleplay were a waste of time. Everyone got extremely frustrated, and I, as well as the other players, tried to just end this discussion, but Brad would not let it go. Eventually, we moved on, and a combat happened. Now, Brad should be happy since it seemed like all he was interested in was combat, but no. You see, this whole time, Brad had also been complaining about the combat. Not about how I was running it, but just the mechanics of Dungeons and Dragons. It should be more like X system or Y homebrew rules. This thing didn't make sense. That thing was annoying. And again, once he just started, he would not stop arguing. Every time I wouldn't allow him to do something during combat because it was against the rules, or I had him roll a check for something, he argued I should just rule of cool it, and turned it into a 15-minute discussion. Now, I'm all for players telling me when they disagree on my ruling, but please do it after the session, not in the middle of it. In this particular combat, he wasn't happy about the initiative order, and complained that it was stupid how in D&D you couldn't change around the order like in some other systems, where everyone went on the same turn and players decided in what order. He again started to argue for about 10 minutes because I wouldn't let him switch initiative and was putting down the whole combat. Afterwards, we were about halfway into the session. He suddenly goes, "Guys, I don't really think I enjoy this game," and then paused. I am pretty sure he was hoping the other players would agree with him, but everyone was just awkwardly sitting there silent. And then he said that he wanted to take a break from D&D for a while. Then he left the session and we continued without him. Now, I know at this point I should have talked to him a long time ago, and I was definitely thinking about it. I am very awkward and I hate confrontation, so I was kind of trying to drag it out, telling myself, if this happens again, I'll definitely talk to him. But as he had basically left the game by himself, I thought it wasn't necessary and just hoped he wouldn't come back. Only, he would still show up before the sessions, and now it was pretty clear he was just hoping we'd play his game instead. He usually left when we started playing, as no one wanted to play his game anymore. Two things made me finally realize that I definitely had to do something. First, he ran a game for us. It was a Call of Cthulhu game, which no one had played before except Brad, but he had this idea for a small town setting with mysterious things going on, and we all agreed to play it. How do you square combat-obsessed roleplay hating with Call of Cthulhu? Anyway, this was back when we switched campaigns, so we played it in between ending one campaign and starting the next. It was actually really fun. Now, a few weeks after he left our main campaign, he wanted to run a follow-up to his Call of Cthulhu game. We've played the same characters as in the first game, with one new character played by someone who had joined our group recently. The whole game was horrible, and no one was having fun. And when we were having fun, role-playing between our characters, Brad would interrupt and skip over those parts. First off, he gave each of us a plot hook for a different quest plus one hook for everyone together. The quest that involved everyone was linked to the previous game we had played, while the individual ones were new. The main hook was something like, "Go to this place in 3 days' time." So naturally, we thought we'd all kind of follow our own hooks or team up to follow one or two until the main hook, which was obviously the main one since it involved everyone and linked to our previous adventure. But that was immediately shut down by Brad, insisting we choose one of the hooks to focus on instead. Okay, makes sense. He can't run like 4 different stories in a game that's only meant to last 2 or 3 sessions. We obviously choose the main hook that involved everybody. Brad didn't seem to like that, saying we didn't have to choose that one, but he let us go ahead, and I'm honestly not sure what he was expecting. Next, 2 people were role-playing a scene together where their characters, who didn't like each other, had to work on something together, and it was a really fun dynamic. Not to Brad, though, who just wanted to skip over the whole scene after 2 minutes. Okay, I guess back to the main plot. Finally, we all team up, maybe halfway into the session, and head to the forest where we were meant to investigate the mysterious clue we had gotten. On the way there, the 2 aforementioned characters take little jabs at each other, meant to build their dynamic, just harmless mocking each other in good fun. I don't remember exactly what was said, but at some point one character said something along the lines of, "It's okay, kid," as the other character was a teenager. And Brad suddenly went, "Yeah, you don't have to say that." And the player was like, "I know, but that is what my character says. It makes sense in this context." "Yeah, but you don't have to." "Okay, but I did." "Okay, well, he could have just said this." And it went on for a little while. I think Brad had a different image of the character than the player and didn't like that the player wouldn't play his character a certain way. Eventually, we arrived in the forest. All we had was a note saying help from a mysterious creature we had previously encountered in the forest. But we didn't know where to go or what to look for, and when we arrived at the place in the forest we had found the creature the last time, there was nothing there. Since there were no clues whatsoever, we weren't sure what to do. There was some silence, and I eventually said, "I guess I investigate? Like, look around if there is anything I can find. Maybe on the ground or in the bushes?" Just not really sure of what we were supposed to do. And Brad just started laughing like I had just said something really dumb and said, "Oh, you want to look around?" Like, yeah, what are we supposed to do? We did eventually find something, but the game wrapped up shortly after that. It left a bitter taste in everyone's mouth though, and we never played the second session. It really felt like Brad should have just written a story. It was He was clearly very passionate about the setting and his NPCs, and didn't like it when we were doing something that didn't align with his vision. The final straw was when we played another one-shot. I DM'd it, and we had planned it since a player couldn't make it, and luckily I had this idea for a one-shot. We had discussed it in chat, so Brad must have seen it, but he didn't ask if he could join. But on the day, Brad once again showed up before the session in the voice chat, and we invited him to play since it felt rude not to, I guess. He did join, and his behavior was the same as it was before, and even worse! The party wanted to roleplay, he wanted to move on, so he just did. The party was investigating the room for clues. He opened the door and stormed into the next room, triggering combat. The party wanted to talk to an NPC. He went ahead and once again triggered combat. That, combined with him once again complaining about mechanics and the way I ran the game, as well as just taking all the spotlight, made me finally realize that even if I was the only one in the group having issues with him, I couldn't play with this guy anymore. I brought it up with the other players, and they all agreed that Brad was taking the fun from everyone. A little after the one-shot, I sent him a long overdue message telling him so, and even though he didn't agree with me, he didn't argue, and just left the group. About a month later, he sent me another message, asking to rejoin the main campaign, but play a character that only activates during combat. I think the idea was that he was playing a World War II veteran who got, icicade? What's an icicade? Anyway, his soul is now stuck in a sword or whatever, so he'd only come out when there was combat. Never mind, we often had whole sessions without combat, and he also didn't like my combat. So yeah, I shut that idea down. A while later, he actually sent me another message, saying that he had realized he was being a bad player, and apologized. So I hope whatever game he is playing now is more fun for everybody. I do think he was genuine and didn't realize he was doing something wrong, and I should have talked to him way sooner, and maybe prevented things from turning bad. I've definitely learned to be more confident in dealing with players like this. I hope that next time I'll handle it better. And to give the story a happy ending, it's been about a year and we are reaching the finale of our campaign in a few sessions. Either Strahd or the party is going to meet their end. Congratulations on managing to complete Curse of Strahd. It is definitely an epic campaign. Totally recommend it. Can't say that I have had the same fortune, but good job to the OP. And, well, good job on the reflection. Sometimes problem players are just people who don't realize that they're a problem, and you need to bring it up to them. The true sign of a real issue is when they don't take criticism. And this guy admitting that he wasn't doing a great job as a player, well, that shows somebody who was probably willing to take criticism. Of course, the cynic in me is screaming that he was lying, but, you know, let's just go with the happy ending. If you aren't enjoying a campaign like Brad clearly wasn't enjoying this campaign and the style it was run, look, it's okay to just leave. Brad refusing to leave and just making the rest of the party miserable is the worst possible thing he could have done. It just makes the game a miserable affair for everybody if you are trying to ruin it by forcing it to be a game that you want to play. If the game isn't something that you enjoy and the rest of the players are enjoying it, the best thing to do is just walk away. Damn, I don't even know where to begin. Months ago, had a group of my IRL friends start a D&D campaign. We have Bobby the DM, Chrissy the DM's fiance, myself, a guy named Cheerios, mine and Bobby the DM's best friend, and Jeff, a friend of Bobby's who's not really relevant, he just seemed happy to be there. Names are changed because Bobby and Cheerios read this sub, and they'll probably recognize this story. Anyway, DM Bobby pinged us all in Discord saying he wants to start a campaign. Sure. Let's just cut to the bullet points. Bobby was a first-time DM, and it showed. He's also a really busy person, and aside from a handful of sessions, almost never had anything prepared, and just makes everything up as we go, with a vague idea of how things should play out. The world isn't fleshed out, cities and towns are created as we go to them, and we only go to a new one when we are railroaded into a new place. There was no world map until session 3 or so. The world map contained 2 places we had been, and one we were on our way to. That's it. Encounters were not balanced or planned in any meaningful way. We have not had a battle that consisted of more than one type of enemy. Several encounters were just literally groups of 20, 14 or so health skeletons. We fought through a church basement that had 30 identical cultists. Our battle this past week was 6 unicorns. All the battles were like this, save for one, which Cheerios designed for Bobby due to these following issues. It took place on a completely level floor with no obstacles or interesting terrain. I actually stopped playing my monk character because I was never given an opportunity to do anything except basic strikes. Deflect missiles? What's that? I switched to paladin, sorcerer, so I could at least visualize something more interesting. Combat was never described. If we missed, we just missed. If we hit, we hit. That's the end of the entire narrative. Combat is the majority thing our sessions are made of, by the way. There is almost no role-playing either. Nothing is ever described. We go places, we show up. Sometimes a character has green eyes to indicate plot relevance. I once walked into a ballroom. What does it look like? It looks like a room where balls are held? This is a quote. There are no economic systems put in place. We have no daily upkeep. We have nothing to spend money on. We are still given gold for doing things. We do not eat, by the way. We take long rests in the middle of dungeons. We were asked if we wanted to visit the general store during our last session. We knew there was no general store. Now on to the issue that stemmed from the relationship between Chrissy and Bobby, the fiancé and the DM. Chrissy's character is the head of a world-famous monster hunting guild. She is absolutely loaded with money. She is known the world over. That's her backstory. Every recurring NPC works for her character. I still do not know or care who these people actually are. Chrissy's character is a priss to literally everyone. She simply insults everybody. Like, everybody. There are no consequences for this. NPCs just do what she says without objection. Chrissy's character is also a priss to us, in-game. She does not like doing anything she doesn't want to 100%. Anything that didn't revolve around her character and her backstory, she didn't even bother trying. My monk had a lost monastery and an old friend left in charge of it. There was never a monastery in the world, or any other monks. Jeff was a pirate. We flew over the ocean in an airship once. Oh yeah, the guild was just given a free airship, meaning we were given a free airship. When we tried to implement some kind of upkeep system and set in stone how much money we had, Chrissy insisted that since her character was canonically loaded, she should have 50,000 gold or so equivalent in gems. I was given 45 gold. We decided that we were going to do a side bounty to make some money, because now we needed to make money. Chrissy was annoyed because she did not want to do any side quests, as she had no reason for money. Chrissy's character hid for the entire encounter, and Chrissy just didn't interact with us at all. This is the third time Chrissy had stopped playing in the middle of a session. Cheerios, the DM's best friend, finally snapped last night in the middle of the last session. DM Bobby had asked Chrissy what she wanted to do. It was her turn. She had done nothing. She had avoided the fight entirely. Cheerios and I were one bad round of combat away from dying. Cheerios deduced that Chrissy did nothing because she did not want to play at all. Chrissy responded by disconnecting. The session ended several minutes later. Cheerios and I talked about the session. Our other player, Jeff, was at work during all this. We agreed on all of the above points. We decided Cheerios should talk to Bobby. They're good friends, and he's good with words. Cheerios talks to DM Bobby. Cheerios says that if these things aren't fixed, he would excuse himself from the table. I said I wasn't sure if I'd follow. Bobby leaves and talks to his fiancée, Chrissy. We later learn this leads to a massive fight. Chrissy leaves the Discord. Cheerios is unsure if he's leaving or not. The campaign needs to be rewritten. Chrissy is out for sure, and I've not even spoken to DM Bobby. Oh, and nobody has even told Jeff. This one is just a bunch of new DM problems that never get learned from. Look, when you DM for the first time, you're going to make some of these mistakes. It's going to happen. The important thing is communication between the DM and the players. Communicating what the issues are and fixing them. Now, of course, beyond the typical new DM problems, not great combat encounters, not a lot of story, etc., the main issue that I find is, well, DM girlfriend favoritism or DM fiancé favoritism. I mean, that story is as old as time, and I've said multiple times, you can absolutely play D&D with people that you have a relationship with, whether it be friendship or romantic, it doesn't matter. You can absolutely play D&D with those people, but you need to make sure to not let that relationship stand in the way of treating the party as a group, treating them all equally, because if you favorite a player, people will, well, they'll definitely notice, and it can definitely result in your campaign falling apart, as this exhibits perfectly. If you guys enjoyed this episode of RPG Horror Stories and you want to let me know, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, then please do subscribe to Crispy's Tavern. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, then leave the comment main character with a question mark to let me know you made it to the end of the video. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.